Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, you've been teaching online at Columbia, and we're going to talk about your topic today because it's a pretty amazing topic, traumatic loss during childhood, right?
Yes, I am talking about how having somebody die basically changes your entire life and you grieve it for the rest of your life. And how does it transform and change over time? So we're going to look at like what happens. I mean, today is Scott's anniversary date.
Your brother who was killed in 1983.
Yep. He and Matthew, my cousin, died together in a very traumatic car accident. And how does that impact me today? 30 plus years later, it's been 35 years, 36 years. So how is that still impacting me, and how has it changed and transformed? Because the grief changes and it transforms. So we're going to talk about that today. And we're also going to talk about it with our guest, who's one of our favorite people. We love her, Ann Castaldo. And Ann is the president and founder of the Tony Brown Foundation. She is very involved in the grief and loss world. She speaks all over the country. She basically was in charge of the Compassionate Friends National Conference last year. And she is here to talk about her own loss when her son Tony died.
Thank you very much.
So Ann, tell us a little bit about Tony and how you started on this journey.
Okay, well, Tony was 24, full of life, living it to the fullest. He was a couple of weeks from graduating film school in Florida. Wow. And he came down with a rare blood disease, which he could have survived with. It was something that he could live with, but unfortunately, there was a medical error and he'd never made it home from the hospital. So, but we live our lives now. It's been 9 years in July. And I have to tell you, it's odd to say this, but I'm just so grateful for the time that we've had with Tony. I'm grateful for all the memories that we share. The boys and he has 2 other siblings, and we just laugh about him. Yesterday was Easter, and we spent the day telling stories about Tony. It organically happened to it. Wasn't anything that just, somebody mentioned something and the story came up and I was like, oh my gosh, remember when your brother? And we were laughing and sharing, and it's a great place to be now. So
now, how old were his siblings when he died?
Okay, so Tony was 24, making Danny 27, and David would have been 29.
And they lost their baby brother. That was the youngest.
Absolutely. And David's birthday was just 3 weeks. His 30th birthday was 3 weeks after Tony's death. So that was odd because we had a big party planned, and in true Tony fashion, with my boys' call, we went ahead and celebrated David's birthday still, because they're like, that would be what Tony would want. Tony was all about the partying and having a good time, and we did. And it's odd to say, I know it was grief and shock, but we did have a good time. We enjoyed it, and Tony was with us, as he always is. But it was difficult for their boys. They lost their dad, so maybe 4 years before that, to colon cancer too. So they've gone through a lot of loss, but they're doing well.
So as a mom of boys,
yes,
what do you find works? Because what I hear a lot, Ann, and this will not surprise you, is that parents are always coming up to me saying, Heidi, I'm really concerned about my boys because they're not talking.
Right.
And I worry that something's wrong with them because they're not talking about the loss. So what advice would you have, and what would you say to these parents?
But may I say girls too? I think don't parents come and say their kids aren't talking to them also?
Absolutely.
They do.
It's a very common subject. I mean, I facilitate Compassionate Friends meetings, and I also hold our own meeting with the Tony Brown Foundation. And this is something that we talk about all the time, is the other siblings, how they're dealing with this, what they're doing. And you always hear the same thing, why aren't they talking about their brother? Why aren't they talking about their sister? How do I help them? Personally, I don't think there's much we can do to help them other than leave them alone, let them know we're here for them. And, I'm the type of person who, I know that people don't talk about Tony, didn't want to talk about him. They were afraid. I brought him up. I talk about David and Danny. They're alive, but they're well. Something reminds me of them, I talk about it. So I did the same thing with my boys and Tony. whenever something, I'd be like, remember your brother. Do you remember this? And it took years, but now they, so I'll tell you a very interesting story. Tony's birthday was March 9th. He would have been 33 years old.
Wow.
And yeah, so I usually used to reach out to my boys and, what do you want to do? It's your brother's birthday. What do you want to do? This year I left them alone. I didn't say boo to them. I thought, you know what, let me see what happens. I don't want to push what I need, my needs onto them. That's something I feel very strongly about. David was away, but Dan called me up the morning of Tony's birthday and was like, Mom, what are you doing today? I'm like, well, I don't know, not much. Well, can I come over for dinner? I'm like, if you like. And I found that if you leave them alone, they will reach out to you. And, we usually make London broil, Tony's favorite meal. And I knew he was watching what he ate. So I said, well, we can have pasta or whatever, fish or whatever you want. He goes, well, no, I thought we'd have London broil, Mom. So they do come around. But I think giving them that space to do what they need and grieve how they need to is very important to do.
I think one of the things that we know is that kids respond the way their parents do. Yeah. And she has such an open way of dealing with those boys. Isn't that what some of the research shows, Heidi, that the parent kind of leads the way, or the family members?
Absolutely. And if there's a strong parent-child bond, it's helpful. And the thing that I like about Anne, Mom, is that when her boys, she gives the boys space. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, Anne, even when you brought up Tony, if your boys didn't respond, that was okay.
Absolutely.
Like you didn't have an expectation that they would say, oh, thanks for bringing up Tony, Mom. That's great. Let's talk more.
No, and a lot of times they wouldn't. It was just I would just say it so they knew that it was okay. Like it was okay for them to talk, or it was okay for them not to. Compassionate Friends holds a candle lighting every year. And in the beginning, it was very important for me to have my boys with me. And now neither one of them attend, and it's okay. And I finally gave them, I think, the correct kind of permission to not come by telling them, if you come and you're uncomfortable, that just makes me feel bad. And it's one thing to say, it's okay if you don't come. They hear those words, but they also hear, I'd really want you there. Mm-hmm. And when I finally said to them, I don't want you to be there if you're going to be uncomfortable, I think a weight was lifted off of my shoulders and their shoulders, because I wasn't at the event constantly saying, oh, look at Danny sitting over there. He doesn't want to be here. Mm-hmm. I was fine because I knew they were happy, and they were okay because they knew I was where I needed to be.
Did you ever feel early on, Anne, that you and Jeff, your husband, did you ever feel that you guys were gieving to the point where the boys were worried and were taking care of you, or not?
Early on, Danny, you'll love this. Danny called me up and said, Mom, I need to meet you for coffee. Now, my son doesn't drink coffee. So I thought this was a little odd, but he wanted to meet at a coffee shop. So we went, and he said, I'm very concerned about you. Mm-hmm. You're not grieving correctly. Something's wrong, Mom. You have 2 other boys. You have to remember that. It can't be all about Tony. We're worried. And we had this big, long conversation. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing fine. I'm going out. I'm doing, I couldn't understand it. But we had this great conversation. He got everything out, and I responded how I thought I needed to. But a few months later, he went to an event for his work in New York City, and he met this gentleman who had lost his son 12 years ago. And he called me up. He said, Ma, I am so sorry for what I said to you. He goes, this gentleman, I could have said, look, there's pink unicorns flying in the sky. And he would have said, do you know my son hated the color pink? Because everything I said to this gentleman came back to the death of his child. He goes, and I suddenly realized that there is nothing I can do to help you except be there.
Wow.
And so I was fortunate that he had that experience that helped shed some light on what he needed to, where his mother was in her grief. Mm-hmm. But to this day, they're still, I don't think they want to protect me. I think they think I'm strong enough to handle it, which, that's their choice.
Mm-hmm. Heidi, you make the point that kids are really scared, right?
Yes. We're scared when we see our parents. I was 20 when Scott died, and I'd never seen my parents that vulnerable.
Right.
And I was scared that they weren't going to snap out of it, basically. I mean, that they were going to be, absolutely destroyed for the rest of their lives. And my life as I knew it was changed, but that I was so afraid that I was never going to get my parents back at all.
Right.
I'd never seen them cry at that level. I'd never seen them so distraught ever. It was, you know how bad it is at the beginning. It's
Yeah.
pretty overwhelming for
Yep.
kids to see their parents like that.
Right. And I think my boys were afraid of that too.
Yeah.
But I try, and it's something that is very important to me. I have a tattoo that I got of Tony after he passed away.
Yeah.
And recently I redid it because I look at it now and it's the death of my child. And I'm like, I'm bigger than that. I have 3 boys. So I added some music notes that connected my boys to it because it actually, to me, was sad. I mean, the death of a child is sad, but this tattoo was a representation of what I lost and not what I had. And I needed to make it more about what I had. So I added the boys to it.
So as your grief transformed, it transformed. Where is it? Can we see it, or is it in a weird place?
Possibly.
There it is.
Oh, there it is.
So it was so interestingly, 2 boys, I wanted to put that's Tony's signature, and I wanted to put their signatures on either side, and one of them said, no, it's a memorial tattoo, I don't want my name there. So what I did was, when I was going through a divorce with their dad, there was a song that carried me through a very rough time, and I put the music notes, because music is something that connects my boys, and I put the music notes to that song underneath it, so I know what it is.
Heidi, talk a little bit about about kids feeling like they're not enough for the parents at times.
Yeah, and you probably got this, but yes, it's hard because Tony and Scott take up a big amount of emotional energy in the family.
Absolutely.
They take up a lot. So I don't know if this was ever an issue for your family at all. Just like, okay, are we enough, and are we enough by ourselves without Scott and Tony?
So, yeah, and I think that's very important because they never felt Tony overshadowed the boys since the day he was born. So, they felt that. And I do remember at one point them saying to me, like, Tony was your favorite when he was alive, and now he's your favorite dead, and we can't compete with that.
Right.
I'm paraphrasing, but, to the same token, that's kind of the essence of what they were saying. Like, don't make it all about Tony. We're here, and we're alive, and we deserve your attention too. And what I noticed was with myself, and we all struggle with photographs, and how do you do this? And I was one person, I have photographs all over my house of my family. And after Tony died, I found myself positioning my boys to where they would be, where there was a picture of Tony in the background, or we have Tony's ashes on the mantle, they didn't realize I was doing this. I'm not sure I did either, to what extent, but Tony was always somewhere in the pictures. And it took me years to be able to take family photos of just the boys and Jeff and I, and put those in frames out. I would take the photos, but I didn't frame them and put them out. And I think they felt that. There was this.
Tony wasn't in them.
Right. It wasn't my family. But it took a few years, and now, I have pictures of the boys and their girlfriends, and they're all out. But it's an interesting aspect because it's almost like you're saying, they're not enough. And somehow we have to validate that they are. I don't know what the answer is. I just know how I can do it. I try real hard to constantly make them aware that I still, I love them and always will. And, we joke about who's the favorite now, and they still say it's Tony. And not because of his death, but just because Tony took up so much space in our lives. He was kind of the glue that kept our family together.
I can relate to that a lot because Scott was the only boy, and he was in the middle of a sea of girls, sisters, and we all loved and adored him. Right. So it was like the girls kind of competed. The girls competed against each other, but we didn't really compete against him because he was the boy. Right. And we just loved on him. And so I totally identify with that. And I think, Anne, it's really hard to wrap your arms around your new life, the next chapter. And struggle of, okay, putting out stuff without Tony in it is the struggle of, okay, who are we now without Scott and Tony physically here?
Right.
And how do we wrap our arms around our new identity as a family without them? And that's part of the healing process, but it's a struggle and it's a dance because you're kind of fighting with it as you move forward into the next chapter.
Yeah, and I think just being honest with everybody involved, my brothers, my mother, my kids, I'm a very open and honest person. So if somebody says something I don't like, I usually will tell them. And I always try to preface it with, please don't take offense, or I'm not telling you this because I want to make you sad. But even when I was at work, I would talk about Tony, and so I'd be like, please let me share something with you. I lost my son. And I'm not doing this for sympathy. It's just something that some people need to know and hear. Recently, someone had told me they were saved by prayers. My life was saved. And I sat with that for a long time, because you think, well, why wasn't my child saved from prayers? Why didn't all this work for my family? And rather than let it eat at me, I felt the need to express this. Like, I'm not mad at you. I'm not upset with you. I don't hate you for saying that. I trust what you believe. But just know, when you're saying that to someone who's lost a child or lost someone where the prayers didn't save them, that it's going to kind of turn a little knife.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to wind up the show right now, but I want you to tell people how to find you on the web, and then I want you to give a little pitch for the Compassionate Friends National Conference coming up.
Okay. Well, interestingly enough, the next chapter in our lives, the Tony Brown Foundation, is kind of on hold right now. My boys and I were going through a revamping of it. So we have a little splash page. The Tony Brown Foundation is going through some exciting changes, and it is the TonyBrownFoundation.org. We're still posting stuff to Facebook, which is the same thing. But we're going to concentrate moving forward on doing good and gratitude and having fun with our foundation. So
I love it. As Tony would have wanted. That's Tony, all about the fun.
Exactly. And that's a transformation as to where we are. And the Compassionate Friends, it's a great conference. If you've lost a child, a grandchild, a sibling, by all means go. There's tons of workshops. There's Healing Haven, Crafty Corner, so much to do, so much that you will touch your heart and touch your soul and just really help you along your grief path.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. And have you got one last message of hope you want to give those folks out there?
Absolutely. Keep putting one foot in front of the other, and know that your child is always with you. Your loved one is always with you, and trust your heart. Just trust in what you're doing, and you will get through it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on. And
thank you for having me.
This is great. Anne's one of my favorite people. She is such a bright light in this world, and she really does talk the talk and walk the walk. And I know it's hard sometimes. And I know that Tony is the one that is really her inspiration, because I know she thinks, what would Tony want? And what would Tony want me to do right now? And he kicks her in the buns when she's feeling and gets her back up again. And I love him for that. And I adore her too and love her. So
love you guys. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for watching this video today. And Heidi and I always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.